Most people have heard of serial killers using darkness as cover, but what about an entire city in blackout?
Yeah, total blackout.
That was Berlin during World War II.
And it created the perfect conditions for the Esban murderer.
That's what our deep dive is looking at today.
We're going to use court transcripts, police reports, even first-hand accounts from people who survived attacks.
It's a story most people don't really know.
Fascinating case, actually.
Definitely horrific crimes, but I think it's more than that, right?
Yeah, it really shows what Berlin was like under Nazi rule.
And how they reacted to this.
The blackout was meant to protect the city from bombing raids.
Right.
Ironically, it made it easy for this killer to operate.
So a city already on edge.
Living with constant threat.
Then you add a serial killer to that.
How did that impact the investigation?
That's a good question.
Well, the Nazi regime actually tried to suppress the news.
Really?
Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, he was afraid it would damage public morale.
Well,
So you have this atmosphere of fear and secrecy, which made it almost impossible for the police to do their jobs.
so we've got information control as a factor already.
And then the blackout itself.
Incredibly difficult for investigators.
And terrifying for the residents.
Absolutely.
The darkness was a literal cover for the killer.
Yeah, he could just disappear.
Blend right into the shadows.
And everyone's lives were affected by the blackout.
People couldn't see where they were going.
Right.
Accidents happened all the time.
Constant sense of unease.
Exactly.
I was reading that the killer used phosphorescent badges to target his victims.
Oh, yeah.
The kind people wore so they wouldn't bump into each other.
Chilling.
Turning a safety measure into a weapon.
Clever.
It shows he was planning these attacks, not random.
Deliberate choices.
So let's talk about the timeline of the attacks.
Okay.
The first ones took place in these community gardens.
The Friedrichsfelder allotment gardens.
Right.
People thought of those as safe spaces.
Especially during the war.
A place of respite. Connect with nature. Grow some food.
Yeah. Get away from everything.
But because of the blackout.
They became something much more sinister.
Definitely.
The early attacks were brutal.
Mm.
Jumping out of the darkness, shining a flashlight in the victim's eyes,
Blinding them?
then physically and verbally assaulting them.
Awful.
Was there a pattern to these attacks?
At first it seemed random. Women of all ages and backgrounds.
So anyone could be a target.
As the attacks continued, though, the violence escalated.
Okay.
And then a clearer pattern emerged.
One police report I was looking at mentioned Lena Budinsky.
Yeah, her attack seems to be a turning point in the case.
Why is that?
It was August of 1939.
Okay.
Lena was stabbed multiple times. Right outside her home.
Oh, wow.
It was the first time the killer had used a weapon.
So that forced the police to see this wasn't just harassment.
They were dealing with something much more serious.
But even then, the investigation was limited by the war effort.
Police were stretched thin.
Blackout making things even more chaotic?
Absolutely.
Did they have any leads at this point?
They had some descriptions from witnesses.
Okay.
Vague, often contradictory.
Not very helpful.
This was before DNA evidence, too.
So they had to rely on eyewitness accounts and physical evidence?
Right.
Did the press cover the early attacks?
Some limited coverage. But you have to remember, Goebbels was suppressing information.
Of course.
He didn't want anything to hurt the image of the Nazi regime.
So people knew there was danger.
But they weren't given any specific information.
Which again makes it even harder for the police.
To gather information and track down the killer.
The blackout, the censorship, the chaos of war.
Yeah, it's like the perfect conditions.
For this killer to operate.
And then he changes things up.
Really?
Shifts his focus from the gardens to the Esban commuter train.
Why the trains?
Was it just the darkness?
Or was there a strategic reason?
Well, the Esban line ran through really populated areas of Berlin.
So it was busy.
It was a lifeline for workers. Okay. Lots of women filling jobs vacated by men at war.
So a larger pool of victims.
And the blackout conditions on the trains were worse than in the gardens.
That's scary.
Pitch black train cars, people crammed together, a sense of anonymity.
Made it easier for the killer to blend in.
Chooses targets.
And the attacks on the trains got even worse.
More brutal.
There's one account from Gerda Kargel, who was attacked in September of 1940.
Yeah.
She was pushed from a moving train.
It's amazing she survived.
It is.
Her case shows another challenge victims had at that time.
What do you mean?
When Gerda reported the attack, the police said it was an accident.
Well,
A drunken fall from the train.
they didn't want to believe her?
They just didn't want to believe that a predator was targeting women on the Esban line.
That's hard to believe. Even with clear evidence, sometimes people just don't want to see the truth.
A way of protecting themselves from a terrifying reality
And in this case, it allowed the killer to keep going.
for a long time.
That's frightening. So the authorities not believing her must made him bolder.
Oh, yeah.
The attacks did get worse after Gerda's case.
Yeah, the violence escalated.
Like how so?
Well, Elfriede Franker, she was murdered on the train.
On the train.
Yeah, in December of 1940.
Oh, wow.
Her death really shocked the city.
Yeah, I bet.
Even with the limited press, people were getting scared.
So the police were under pressure to catch him.
Definitely.
I mean, the blackout and the censorship weren't helping.
Nope.
Did they change their tactics at all?
Yeah, they started using decoys.
What, like fake passengers?
Yeah, female officers disguised as passengers,
On the Esban line.
hoping to catch him in the act.
Oh, wow. So dangerous for those
It
officers.
was risky, but they were desperate.
I can't even imagine.
Riding the train in darkness, knowing the Esban murderer could be right there,
You're the bait, but also the hunter.
and you can't even see who you're dealing with.
Must take an incredible courage to do that job.
Shows how committed they were to catching this guy.
But the killer was smart.
He was elusive.
Like how?
He seemed to know the police tactics.
Really?
There's a report about one decoy,
Uh-huh.
Edith Schmidt. She noticed a man watching her.
Staring at her.
He got off the train, nothing happened.
But what, she was convinced he knew she was a police officer.
So he was aware, he was watching, adapting.
And then he changed his hunting ground
Again.
back to the Friedrichsfelder Gardens.
Wow. Like he was playing a game with them?
A deadly one.
And the attacks continued.
They did.
When was the next one?
July 1941.
Okay.
Frida Katzio.
Yeah.
Murdered in the gardens.
Same brutality as the train attacks.
Exactly the same. Definitely the same killer.
So back to square one.
Sort of.
Did they have any leads this time?
They found some shoe prints near her body.
Oh, really?
And the prints led them to a man named V. Hyman.
Lived near the gardens.
Yep. Did they finally have their guy? A brick in the case.
Well, at first it seemed promising. Hyman was known for being a voyeur,
Mm.
harassing women.
Mm.
But he had an alibi for a lot of the murders.
Including Frida's.
Yeah.
Another dead end.
It's like they were always one step behind.
Lies and shadows.
But they did eventually catch him.
How?
It's a combination of things.
Like what?
Remember the shoe prints?
Uh-huh.
They were a style worn by railroad workers.
Okay.
So the focus shifted back to the railroad.
Makes sense.
And then a railroad worker came forward.
With information?
Yeah, he mentioned his colleague, Paul Ogorzo, would disappear during his shifts.
Oh, Gorzo. Wait, I think I've heard that name.
He was a signalman for the railroad.
Okay.
Actually, he'd been questioned earlier in the investigation.
Really?
He wore the same kind of shoes as the prince, but they ruled him out.
Why?
His work schedule seemed like an alibi.
Wait, are you saying they talked to the killer but dismissed him?
Yeah, pretty chillin'.
That's unbelievable.
Or Gorzo. Just a regular guy. Devoted Nazi party member. A brown shirt, even.
Sure.
The paramilitary wing of the Nazi party.
Oh, right.
Known for being brutal, enforcing Nazi ideology.
So he was right there the whole time.
And, get this,
What?
he had even escorted women on the Esban line during the attacks,
Wow, that's crazy.
protecting people while preying on them.
And his Nazi affiliation just makes it even more disturbing.
Adds another layer to the whole case.
It does.
It makes you think about evil,
Yeah.
how it hides in plain sight, how ideology gets twisted to justify awful things.
So the police had this new info on Ogorzo.
Right.
What did they do?
They look deeper into his work records.
Okay.
They noticed something.
What?
The murders often happened when no trains were scheduled at a signal tower.
So he could have left his post.
Without being noticed.
His alibi was wrong.
Exactly.
And then what?
They searched his belongings,
Oh.
found his uniform,
Huh?
bloodstains.
Oh, wow.
That was huge.
Did he try to explain that away?
He said it was from his wife.
His wife.
Said she'd been sick. The police didn't buy it.
Why not?
The blood type didn't match his wife's. It did match several of the victims.
So they finally had him.
They did.
What happened next? Did he confess? I mean, they had him right.
You would think.
The bloodstains, the alibi, his coworker's statement.
But he didn't confess right away.
Oh, really?
He kept saying he was innocent.
Didn't want to admit to anything.
No, but the evidence was piling up.
So what happened?
The police, led by Commissioner Wilhelm Lüdke, they wanted a confession.
Makes sense.
This is where things get a little strange.
Okay.
Lüdke decided to show Ogorzow the reality of his crimes.
How?
He had 5 skulls brought into the room.
Skulls.
Yeah,
Human skulls.
human skulls belonging to some of the Esban murderers' victims.
Ah, wow.
He put them on the table right in front of Ogresow.
That's intense.
It was meant to shock him.
Make him face what he'd done.
Exactly, to break down his denials.
I can't even imagine being in that room.
It must have been a chilling sight.
So did it work?
It did.
The cuss?
Ogorzo was totally shaken by the skulls.
Yeah.
He broke down, confessed to everything.
Wow.
The attacks in the gardens, on the trains, everything.
He gave details.
He described everything. His methods, what he was thinking, how brutal it was.
A glimpse inside the mind of a killer.
A chilling confession.
Why did he do it, though? What was his motive?
He said he hated women. He blamed them for his problems, resented them.
A twisted way of thinking?
It was, but it shows the darkness that was driving him.
So a mix of misogyny and self-pity.
Yeah, and he also tried to blame outside factors.
Like what?
Past medical treatments, childhood injuries, even the war.
Trying to make excuses.
Trying to deflect responsibility, make himself seem less monstrous.
Oh, but the court didn't believe those excuses, did they?
No, they saw right through it.
Good.
Ogurzo was found guilty.
Of all the murders.
Multiple murders. Sentenced to death.
What happened?
He was executed the next day.
By decapitation.
By decapitation.
Wow, that was quick. Did that bring closure to the case?
Not really. I think the Esban murderer case left a permanent mark on Berlin.
In what way?
It showed how vulnerable women were,
Yeah.
the power of fear and secrecy, and that even during a war,
Yeah.
individual acts of evil can still happen.
It's hard to think about. The blackout was supposed to protect people,
Right.
but it helped create a monster.
That's the question that stays with you.
It does.
The blackout hid the city, but it also hid the evil within it.
Ogurazo used it to his advantage.
He was able to move unseen, become a phantom, prey on the vulnerable.
And the censorship made everything worse.
Absolutely.
The Nazi regime trying to control information.
It stopped people from knowing the real danger.
And it hurt the investigation.
Their desire for control put more people at risk.
It's scary to think about.
It really is. Shows the danger of controlling information, even if the intentions seem good.
So what can we learn from all of this?
Well, the Esban murderer case isn't just some historical event.
No.
It's a warning. Evil can grow in darkness. Literal and metaphorical darkness.
We have to be aware of that.
It shows how important open communication is. Transparency.
And facing the truth.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it makes us feel less safe.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. What else might be hidden by fear, by secrecy, by people just not caring?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
I agree. We have a responsibility to shine a light into the darkness.
To face the monsters that might be hiding there.
Together.
As individuals.
Yeah.
And as a society.